A 12-year-old homeless girl spoke 9 languages. CEO's reaction shocked everyone. "I'm not a thief. Please, somebody believe me." The cry of a 12-year-old girl echoed through the neon-soaked streets of New York, but no one stepped forward. Strangers turned away, some even smirked, while a police officer dragged her like a criminal. Yet, this same girl spoke 9 languages as if they were her mother tongue. How could the world laugh at brilliance wrapped in rags? What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you her story. Maya was only 12, but life had already etched years of fatigue into her face. She clutched a box of gum and lighters to her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. When the boys appeared, loud and careless, one yanked it from her hands and spilled everything across the pavement. She dropped to her knees, scrambling after the scattered gum, her fingers raw against the concrete. "Please, it's mine," she begged in English, but they laughed and shoved her shoulder. Desperate, she tried French, her voice trembling but sharp, hoping someone might step in. People only stopped to stare, their eyes filled with mockery instead of help. One of the boys hurled her gum into the street like trash. She switched to Spanish, pointing frantically, but a man walking past just muttered that she was putting on some kind of act. Laughter erupted around her, and a girl in the crowd sneered that a filthy kid pretending to be clever was still nothing but a beggar. Her hands shook as she reached for a lighter before it was crushed under a shoe. A boy leaned down and hissed that she should bark like a dog if she wanted it back. The humiliation stung worse than hunger. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Then the flashing lights cut through the night, red and blue bouncing against glass. A police officer strode toward her, his face already hardened. "What did you steal?" he barked, not even giving her a chance to answer. Maya's chest heaved as she tried to explain, clutching her torn backpack to prove it was hers, but his voice drowned hers out. The boys pointed at her, insisting she had tried to take from them. The officer's hand closed around her thin arm, jerking her forward. Maya gasped, stumbling to keep her balance, her heart pounding so loud it filled her ears. Fear pressed into her ribs as the officer dragged her closer to the patrol car, his grip unyielding. Her breath broke into sobs, her voice cracking as she pleaded again. "I'm not a thief. Please, somebody believe me." Maya sat curled on the curb after the officer finally let her go, her thin arms wrapped tight around a torn backpack, as if it was all she owned. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself not to cry. People walked by, shaking their heads, muttering that kids like her never learn. Just another street rat, trying to stir trouble. One man carrying groceries glanced at her and said to his wife that it was sad but expected. Another woman in heels whispered that the girl probably faked those fancy words to get attention. Their eyes slid over her the way water runs off glass, quick, cold, leaving nothing behind. Still, a few faces lingered with a different look. A tourist couple who had heard her speaking French earlier paused and whispered to each other in surprise. A delivery driver who had caught her switching into Spanish scratched his head, wondering how a kid in ripped sneakers could speak better than anyone he knew. The questions formed, but no one asked her directly. Maya kept her head down, hugging the bag with both arms. She knew what they saw. A homeless child, hair messy, shoes coming apart, selling gum and lighters for a few coins. In their minds, that image cancelled out everything else, even the sound of her voice, weaving through languages most adults could never master. The words people left behind hung in the air like ashes. One said she was trouble, another called her a scam. Some said she was just pretending, moving her mouth to sounds she must have picked up from somewhere. The cruelest ones laughed, saying it would not matter if she spoke 100 tongues, she was still nothing more than a stray kid in the city. Yet there was something about the way she spoke that unsettled them. Deep inside, they knew what they had heard was not fake. They had seen her switch from one language to another without hesitation, as natural as breathing. It left them uneasy, curious, but none of them cared enough to step closer and ask how. Maya sat still, her face blank, but inside her chest a storm pressed hard. She was used to being unseen, used to their whispers, but every time she heard them dismiss her, a small piece of her broke off. She wondered if anyone would ever look past the dirt on her clothes, past the cracked skin on her hands, to hear the truth in her words. In that moment, the world passed her by as if she was a shadow. Yet the echo of her voice, slipping through French, Spanish, and Mandarin, lingered in the minds of strangers. It planted a question they could not shake. How could a homeless 12-year-old girl know 9 different languages? Maya remembered nights that felt like dreams. Her mother would come home from long flights, tired but smiling, and kneel beside her bed with the soft scent of coffee and perfume still clinging to her clothes. She made learning a game, whispering words in French, Spanish, or Mandarin until Maya's little voice echoed them back. They would laugh when Maya stumbled, then try again until it sounded right. Every language is a gift, Maya. One day it will save you. Her mother said it often, her eyes full of belief, as if she could already see the girl Maya might become. Those words wrapped around Maya like a blanket, making the world feel safe. But safety ended the day the phone rang. A plane had gone down. There were no survivors. Maya was too young to understand the endless list of names on the news, but old enough to know her mother's voice would never fill their home again. Her father changed almost overnight. He sat at the kitchen table staring into nothing, silent for hours, then began disappearing until late at night. The warmth of their house drained away, replaced by cold hallways and silence that hurt worse than shouting. Maya remembered the day she found him in the bedroom, shoving clothes into a suitcase. His movements were sharp, hurried, like someone trying to escape. She clutched the doorway, too afraid to step in, and asked where he was going. He didn't look at her. His voice came out flat. "I can't do this anymore. You'll figure it out." She begged him to stay, but he zipped the suitcase shut with a hard sound that felt like a wall slamming between them. He grabbed his jacket, brushing past her without a glance, and the smell of perfume that wasn't her mother's clung to him. Minutes later, the door slammed, and his car pulled away. Maya stood in the doorway long after the sound faded, her chest hollow, her fingers still trembling from reaching out and finding nothing to hold. She was only a child, but in that moment she knew she was alone. What he left behind was not only the bills and the silence, but a wound that told her she wasn't worth staying for. That truth stayed sharper than hunger, sharper than cold nights on the street. Now, in the present, Maya pressed her old dictionary against her chest, the one her mother had marked with notes in the margins. It was more than paper. It was proof that someone had once believed in her, that her voice carried value. She whispered the words again under her breath, the ones her mother had given her as armor. Every language is a gift. Maya's knees were sore from crouching, her fingers brushing the cold pavement as she picked up the coins the boys had tossed. Their laughter cut deep, but she forced herself to grab each coin because she knew what they meant. Bread, maybe even enough for a small carton of milk if she stretched it. She told herself to ignore the sting in her chest, to focus only on the hope of food. When the boys finally left, still mocking her, Maya closed her fist around the dirty coins and slipped them into her pocket. She walked down the block, her eyes darting toward the warm glow of a cafe window. The smell of bread and coffee drifted out every time the door opened, and her stomach clenched tight. She thought maybe, just maybe, she could step inside, place the coins on the counter, and for once not be turned away. Her hand pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly above her head. For a moment she felt almost normal, like any other customer, but the illusion broke fast. The owner spotted her ragged clothes and thin frame, and his face hardened before she even spoke. Customers only, not beggars. His voice carried sharp enough that the room went quiet. Heads turned, eyes following her like spotlights. Maya held up the coins in her small hand, whispering that she had money. The owner waved her off, his tone final. "Out." She hesitated, her chest heavy, then stepped back into the cold. The door closed behind her, cutting off the smell of food like someone slamming a lid on hope. The coins in her pocket suddenly felt lighter, worthless. She walked along the sidewalk, shivering as the night grew harsher. A police car slowed beside her, the window rolling down with a mechanical whir. "Move along, kid. You can't sit here." The officer's voice wasn't loud, but it carried no kindness, only dismissal. Maya nodded quickly, forcing herself to keep walking, even though her legs felt weak. By then, every place she turned seemed to push her farther out. The coins were still in her pocket, but no place wanted her. No one trusted her enough to take them. Maya pressed her arms tighter around her backpack, whispering to herself in a voice so low only she could hear. "They all look at me, but no one ever sees me." The truth of that sentence stung more than hunger. It wasn't just the cruel laughter of rich kids, or the cafe owner slamming her out into the cold, or the officer waving her away. It was the silence of everyone else. The way people glanced and looked away, the way they decided with one blink that she wasn't worth seeing. Maya stood near the subway entrance, her small frame nearly hidden by the crowd rushing past. She was trying to sell the last pack of gum when two tourists stopped, their voices hurried and confused. They spoke Italian, their words tangled with worry as they pointed at a crumpled map. People ignored them, brushing past, until Maya stepped closer. Her voice came out calm, steady, speaking in their own language. She guided them toward the right train, pointing with a thin finger, explaining each step as if she had done it 100 times. The tourists blinked in surprise, then smiled with relief, thanking her again and again. In their eyes, for a brief moment, she was not a beggar child, but a lifeline. A man standing a few feet away had watched the whole thing. Daniel Whitmore, CEO of a large logistics company, had been on his way to a dinner meeting. He paused, stunned by the sound of that Italian slipping so easily from the mouth of a 12-year-old in ragged clothes. He waited, half expecting her to stumble, but her words flowed smooth, confident, precise. When the tourists left, Daniel stepped closer and asked how she had learned. Maya looked up, her eyes tired but unflinching. 9 languages, she said softly, as if she were stating something ordinary. He stared at her, searching her face, but she did not smile or ask for praise. "It doesn't matter. Nobody cares." Her voice was flat, stripped of hope, and it caught Daniel in the chest. He had built a life on global communication, on bridges between nations. Yet here was a child with more natural gift than many of his best employees, standing on a dirty corner selling gum. He thought of his daughter at home, the same age as Maya. She had tutors, warm meals, a bed layered with soft blankets. He had never seen her look this hollow, never heard her speak with this kind of raw strength. The contrast cut into him. 2 girls, 12 years old, but their worlds could not have been farther apart. Daniel lingered longer than he meant to, his mind replaying her words. Nobody cares. The truth in them was undeniable. Crowds had passed by her all night, blind to what she carried inside. And for the first time in years, he felt a pull he could not ignore. Daniel hesitated before making the call. The official translator had cancelled an hour before the meeting, and the team was in chaos. A delegation from Brazil was waiting upstairs, their faces tense, their words flowing too quickly for anyone to follow. Daniel thought again of the girl at the subway, her voice steady and calm in Italian, and the memory pulled at him. When Maya arrived, she looked even smaller against the towering glass doors of the boardroom. Her backpack was clutched tight to her chest, the strap digging into her thin shoulder as if it was the only anchor she had. She paused at the threshold, staring at the long, polished table surrounded by men and women in suits, their eyes lifting to her with confusion. Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder and guided her in. Some executives exchanged sharp whispers. Others frowned as if this was a bad joke. Maya lowered her head, afraid of taking up space, and when Daniel gestured for her to sit, she shook her head slightly. She stood instead, close to the wall, her arms wrapped around her backpack like a shield. The air inside the room was tight. Papers shuffled, Portuguese voices rose and overlapped, irritation filling the space. The visitors spoke quickly, their accents rolling fast, and the American team stared blankly, caught in the noise. Daniel turned to Maya quietly. "Can you handle this?" Her chin lifted just enough, and she whispered, "Yes." Then she stepped forward, her voice breaking into the room clear and confident. The first phrase in Portuguese drew every head around the table. The Brazilian delegates leaned back, surprised, then leaned forward again, eyes fixed on her. She moved easily between them, carrying sentences across the table, her tone precise, her rhythm steady. The room shifted. The tension that had weighed heavy minutes before began to dissolve. When one of the Brazilians cracked a quick joke, Maya caught it instantly and replied with a small, playful phrase. Laughter followed, genuine and warm. For the first time all day, shoulders loosened and pens moved with focus. Daniel watched in silence, his chest tight with something like awe. The executives who had frowned were now staring at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. She was not just a child with a backpack. She was a bridge. She was proof that brilliance could bloom in places no one cared to look. The meeting ended smoother than anyone had dared to expect. The lead delegate shook Daniel's hand and said in English, "This was the best session we've had in years. She is better than anyone we have worked with." Daniel's gaze fell on Maya, who was already stacking cups neatly on the tray, as if she didn't belong in the spotlight at all. His voice dropped low, almost to himself, but the truth in it carried. "And she was selling gum on the street last night." Word spread faster than Daniel expected. By the next morning, whispers moved from cubicles to hallways. People asked if it was true that a homeless kid had walked into a boardroom and translated like a professional. Some shook their heads with disbelief. Others rolled their eyes. In the cafeteria, two assistants leaned close over their trays. One said that he had been waiting 2 years for a promotion, and now some street kid had skipped the line. The other smirked and replied that the boss must be trying to make a charity case look like talent. Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the air just loud enough for others to hear. A director passing by muttered under his breath that this was madness. He said the company was risking its reputation by parading a child like a circus act. Another manager added with a sneer that if this continued, next she would be sitting at the head of the board. The sarcasm stung even those who listened from a distance. By afternoon, the tension reached the boardroom. Senior executives sat around the polished table, their voices clipped with frustration. One of them said that Maya was a liability, that she had no degree, no training, and no business representing the company. Another leaned forward and called her a distraction, nothing more than a burden on the image they had worked years to protect. Daniel sat in silence, jaw tight, but he heard every word. He was ready to defend her, but before he could speak, Maya appeared in the hallway outside. She had been on her way to return a stack of files and froze when the voices carried through the half-open door. She pressed her back against the wall, her small hands gripping the folder. Her breath caught when she heard one of them laugh and say that she belonged with a mop, not in an office. Another voice followed, colder, saying the company was not a shelter for lost children. Maya's eyes burned and tears welled, but she forced them back. She would not let them see her break. Her face hardened as she listened to her worth being torn apart like scraps of paper. The voices of men in suits, powerful and polished, made her feel smaller than she had in years. When the meeting ended, she walked quickly down the hall, her footsteps steady, even though her chest ached. She kept her chin high, determined not to let them see the streaks of red in her eyes. Inside, though, the words clung like barbed wire. They thought she was nothing. They thought she was temporary. But Maya whispered to herself as she pushed open the stairwell door. "If I survive the streets, I can survive this." She would not let their cruelty erase what she had already proven. She was 12, but she had already carried more weight than many of them ever would. The boardroom was colder than usual, the kind of cold that came not from air conditioning but from eyes fixed with judgment. Maya sat at the end of the long table, her small frame dwarfed by the leather chairs and glass walls. She felt every stare like a weight pressing down, but she refused to lower her chin. At the head of the table, Eleanor Craig, a veteran board member, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the silence. She's nothing. No degree, no background. This isn't a charity. The words landed heavy, leaving no room for kindness. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Her chest burned, but she forced her voice steady. You want results? Check the contracts. Her eyes didn't waver. She reminded them of the Brazilian deal that had stalled for months until she stepped in. She named the errors in translation she had corrected, the financial losses she had prevented in a matter of hours. The room shifted uncomfortably, but Eleanor pressed harder. A child cannot run business. She belongs in school, not in here. The remark drew a low murmur of agreement from others. They expected Maya to shrink, to fold under the weight of authority, but she straightened in her seat, her voice stronger now. I never asked to be here as a gift. I earned it. I fixed what your degrees and titles could not. Her words cut with clarity, not arrogance, but truth. For a moment, even those who doubted her could not look away. Eleanor's jaw tightened, her hands folded neatly on the table. You think this company should gamble its future on instinct? Maya met her gaze without blinking. No, this company should stop wasting talent because it does not come dressed in a suit. The tension thickened, the silence after her words louder than shouting. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but carrying weight across the table. She's not charity. She's the proof we've been blind for too long. He leaned forward, his eyes moving from one board member to the next. If we cannot see her value, then we are unfit to call ourselves leaders. The air drained out of the room. No one spoke. Even Eleanor looked away for a moment, her pen tapping faintly against the folder in front of her. Maya sat still, her hands trembling under the table, but her face remained calm. She had not only defended herself, she had forced them all to confront their blindness. The weeks that followed carried a quiet shift through the building. Where whispers of doubt once chased her, now footsteps paused outside Maya's small office door. People began to see not the ragged child they had judged, but the voice that had silenced an entire boardroom. She had become someone others looked toward, not because of her title, but because of the steadiness in her presence. Interns were the first to come. They lingered before presentations, clutching their notes with nervous hands, and found courage when Maya reminded them to breathe, to speak clearly, to believe in themselves. She never lectured, only spoke in words simple and real. Her presence was like a hand on their shoulder, grounding them before they stepped into the unknown. One afternoon, Bao, a shy intern, stayed behind when the others had left. His voice cracked as he admitted that his mother was a janitor in another building, and that she spoke 5 languages, but no one ever cared. He confessed that he used to feel ashamed, pretending she was just another cleaner. Maya's eyes softened, and she leaned forward with quiet certainty. Never be ashamed of where you come from. That's your strength. The words sank into him, straightening his shoulders, giving him something he had been missing for years. But it wasn't only the interns who changed. One evening after hours, Thomas, a senior staff member with more than 20 years at the company, stopped by her office. He had once been one of the loudest skeptics, shaking his head when she first appeared, convinced she was a distraction. He leaned on the doorway, his voice rougher than usual, as he admitted he had been wrong. He said he had never imagined a child could carry a room the way she did in that board meeting, and that watching her had forced him to confront his own arrogance. For the first time, his eyes held respect instead of doubt. That moment mattered to Maya in a different way. It was proof that the change wasn't just whispers among interns or passing curiosity. It was deeper. People who had once dismissed her were now re-evaluating themselves, letting go of pride to acknowledge what they had refused to see. The ripples spread quietly. Maya's words and her way of being didn't demand attention, but they carried weight. People began repeating them, sometimes without realizing. Don't be ashamed. That's your strength. It passed from one conversation to another, reshaping the air of the company. Even Daniel noticed the shift. He saw employees leaving her office calmer, more confident, as if they had been reminded of their worth. He saw seasoned managers soften, not because Maya asked them to, but because she reminded them of something human that titles and degrees had buried. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was changing the culture, one voice at a time. Daniel sat across from Maya one quiet afternoon, the city humming faintly outside his window. Papers had been signed, meetings held, and questions asked, but now it was real. He had become her guardian, not just in name, but in heart. She would no longer face the streets alone. She finally had a home. Maya's life began to shift in small but powerful ways. She had a bed with clean sheets, a door that locked, and meals that waited for her at the table. More than anything, she had someone who asked how her day was and actually listened. The walls she had built for survival slowly softened into trust. Months later, Daniel brought her to a community education summit where leaders gathered to discuss opportunity for children. The organizers invited Maya to speak, not because of her title, but because of her story. She stood on the stage, her hands gripping the podium, her voice steady, though her heart raced. She began with a simple truth. I was invisible. Then someone saw me. The room hushed, leaning into her words. She told them what it felt like to be judged by rags instead of ability, to be overlooked even as her voice carried 9 languages. Her eyes searched the audience. Don't just give a kid a seat at the table. Bring more chairs. The words landed heavy, then spread like ripples across a still pond. It was not a plea. It was a challenge, one born from pain but carried by hope. Applause rose slowly, then filled the room, not because she sounded polished, but because she sounded real. Maya stepped back, a small smile breaking through, the kind that carried both relief and pride. For once, she did not feel like an outsider telling her story. She felt like she belonged. That night, Daniel walked beside her out of the hall. He glanced at her, seeing not the child he had first noticed on a cold street corner, but a young girl stepping into her own light. And he knew her mother had been right. Every language was a gift, but the greatest gift was being seen. Talent has no uniform. Compassion can change the course of a life. Maya's story had begun with loss, with silence, with shadows. Now it continued with courage, with love, and with the reminder that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth. From a frightened girl on a dark street corner to a voice that changed boardrooms and found a family, Maya's journey reminds us that compassion can rewrite destinies. Her gift of languages was never about words alone, but about being seen, loved, and believed in. Her story is not just hers, it speaks for every child overlooked, every life waiting for a chance. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below, like and subscribe to Emotional Echoes so more hearts can be reached. Thanks for listening.